Welcome to Double Overtime, presented by VC Ultimate. We are back again as the PUL season has officially kicked off. I'm Jenna Weiner. He's Sascha Vogel. Sascha, the college regular season is over. Team South Carolina was just out at Easterns. Won a game in pool play against a really tough pool. Not too bad all around.
Yeah, it's I would call my pool the pool of death. I think a lot of I don't remember how many went to like quarters, and like it was a pretty tough pool. But like I'm proud of the way that my team responded and played, and you know it's definitely it's rough to not win all the games. or win only one, but you know it's a starting point.
Yeah, definitely a starting point. Unfortunately, AC ending up with only one bid in men's, bid at the expense of the Southwest men's, which I personally can't complain too much about, even as I do cover the women's division mostly. But college gets a little bit of a break in the action before conferences and then regionals. And so we can focus on all the semi-pro action. I will be once again commentating for the Falcons home game this weekend against LA. We'll do picks for that game and the rest of the upcoming weekend's action later in the show per usual. Sascha, let's dive right in, talk about some Western Ultimate League Week 4 action. It's amazing. It's a 10-week season. I'm like, oh yeah, long 10-week season. And also, we're like nearly halfway through. What is happening? What is time? I don't understand it. And your Utah Wild has still only played one game. What?
Yeah, it's going by really quickly. We were just talking about week 7, how it's like in like a few weeks. I'm like, wow, it's only a kind of 10-week season. Like, what is going by very quickly.
Yeah, plenty of exciting action every weekend, including this past weekend, Colorado Alpenglow doing the Pacific Northwest double, and unfortunately coming out on the losing side of both their games against Seattle and Oregon. Seattle putting on a bit of a clinic, a bit of a beatdown at home. Tempest showing that they are indeed still the class of the Western Ultimate League, 28-16 winners over Alpenglow. And then on the back side of the back-to-back, Oregon Onyx get their first win of the season, 20-13 to relegate Alpenglow as the only team without a win so far this season. Let's start with that Seattle game, Sascha. Early lead for Seattle, 4-0, 8-3 Seattle lead after one, and it just kind of ballooned from there, and contributions from across the board from Tempest. I mean, at home, but still pretty impressive. These are the kind of scores that we saw them put up on occasion last season, and it's back to normal service, it seems.
Yeah, very, very dominant win by Seattle, and they're looking like they're former dominant selves. Think maybe a little bit of the jitters in that week 1 loss against Arizona, because they're looking like they were last season, which was just seemingly unstoppable. Over the course of this game, a lot of big stats for Seattle, obviously, because when you do 28 points, which I believe is a WL record now for most points in a game.
Yeah, I was just about to pull it up because the WL Insider account on Twitter, great account, you should go follow them, give you all the insider scoop and info. Very helpful for us as well when we're putting the show together. In Seattle's win, here are the WL single game records that they broke or tied. Most goals scored, 28. Most holds in a game, tie high for 16 in a single game. Fewest breaks allowed, tie no breaks allowed. Most hucks thrown, 25. Most hucks completed, a tie at 13. And most blocks, 25. Just incredible numbers. And Sage Jezierski WL record for most assists in a game with 8. That is a record that's probably going to stand for a while. 8 assists in a game when your team scores 28. That's still over a quarter of Seattle's goals that Jezierski threw the assist for, which is mind-blowing in a game with that number of goals.
Yeah, it's like that's a lot. Like even in a big numbers game, like that's a lot. And especially with, this Seattle team where, like, I think last year, even with them winning the whole thing and being so dominant, they didn't have really many players that just had like crazy amount of stats, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
like they
and
didn't put up
Tempest
big
was a very
numbers.
balanced team.
Yeah.
And I think they still are to an extent, with the exceptions of performances like Jezierski's with 8 assists in a single game. Again, it helps that they, as a team, set the most goals scored record in a WL game so far.
Yeah.
So, but still, impressive.
Definitely impressive. And this is not to take away from the Colorado players that had impressive showings as well. I mean, they didn't get the win, but they still played well. Jade McLaughlin, 3 goals, 3 assists. Like that's good for only that's 6 goals out of their 16. That's almost half of the team's goals.
Yeah, Jade McLaughlin is a problem. Like a problem. I don't know if folks are doing like fantasy picks anymore, but if you are and you're looking at a Colorado game, pretty good money to bet that McLaughlin's going to put up, a number of goals and assists basically every single game over and over and over and over and over again. And also, I mean, it shouldn't be that big of a surprise that Kristen Reed, big goal scorer, 2 goals, 3 blocks in Alpenglow's game against Seattle, and then followed it up with 4 goals and an assist against Oregon the next day. So a lot of names that we've come to expect for Alpenglow. It's still impressive nonetheless, again, even in a loss against this incredible Seattle side.
Yeah, and like we can look at this score line and see that, like, I mean, obviously we can tell that Seattle's defense is pretty dominant, but these Colorado players are putting up blocks too. Like it's like they're getting the turnovers that, like, Shayna Brock with 3 blocks in this game. Aubrey Dietrich had a block. Abby Thorpe with a block. Kristen Reed with 3 blocks. Like they're generating these turnovers, not by just forcing Seattle to throw it away. Like they're actually earning these turnovers. And so I don't know. I think it's just the fact that Seattle's D-line offense is just really, really good.
Yeah, and again, it's something that if you just looked at this game from last season, you'd be like, oh yeah, this makes sense. But like, it continues to be impressive after Tempest's surprise loss in week 1 to Arizona, that they've bounced back and have reasserted themselves for the most part. And we can also move to talking about the Oregon game, because I think it's a somewhat similar story for Onyx. Onyx were sitting as the only team without a win coming into the weekend. But again, I think there might be an argument. Maybe I'm wrong. You could tell me I'm wrong. Double OT Pod it on Twitter, or doubleovertime@ultraworld.com. It's our email address. I think we're probably seeing, and even from last week as well, with San Diego going 2-0, the Super Bloom Beach Bowl, that some of the top teams that we thought were going to be the top teams are starting to round into form a little bit, and maybe the week 1 losses from Seattle and Oregon to Arizona were more blips on the radar than they were indicative of what we would see from Tempest and Onyx later in the season. Yeah,
I mean, like, if we look at Onyx's schedule, like, they kind of started off with a gauntlet in their schedule. They had the champions, last year's champions, the last year's runner-ups, and then a hot Arizona team at the beginning of the season. And then they played Seattle again. Like, they drew the short straw when it came to the scheduling at the front of the season, basically.
Yeah, and it's something where, right, Oregon's sitting at 1-3, but as you said, they've played Arizona, San Diego, and Seattle so far, and those are all three of the teams that Oregon was with at championship weekend last year. Oregon, before their game against Colorado, had yet to play a team that didn't make championship weekend, and arguably, even playing Colorado, they still haven't played a team that technically missed championship weekend because Alpenglow weren't in the league. So again, it's a situation where sort of thinking ahead, and we're, again, somehow already towards the middle of the WL season, thinking ahead towards like tiebreakers and end of season records. I could see a world in which Onyx ends up winning over Utah and Colorado twice. And even if they lose to Seattle again, they could still make championship weekend by holding the head-to-head tiebreakers against Utah and Colorado as the second place team out of the Northwest. Like it is conceivable, even with the 0-3 start, given their schedule and given the two initial out of conference losses.
Yeah. And I guess we can talk about some of the stat leaders for Oregon this game. Claudia Tajima, back at it, 3 assists and a block. JC Jones, back at it, doing what she does, getting some crazy layouts and 3 goals as well. And Kristen Roberts with the 4-goal game as well as Tina Snyder, putting up some good numbers there. And there's a bunch of players with like 2 and 2 and 2 and 2 of this, 2 of that, 2 of this, 2 of that. So yeah, it looks like, feels like Oregon is kind of like settling into their team, figuring each other out, and righting the ship. Yeah,
and it's also notable that, again, and kind of still give credit to Alpenglow. It's a tough back-to-back on the road to both Seattle and Oregon, and it bears out when you look at the scores between each of the different quarters. It was only a 3-2 Oregon lead after the first quarter, and then Oregon expanded the lead a little bit more and led 8-5 at halftime, and then it was 14-8 after 3 quarters, and then 20-13 for that final. And especially the sort of shift from 8-5 to 14-8, that's a 6-3 third quarter advantage for Oregon. And maybe that's something where Colorado's playing back-to-back games coming out of halftime, maybe a little sluggish, and Oregon just sort of gets reinvigorated and they cruise to the win from there in the second half. And again, from Colorado's side, Kristen Reed, Jay McLaughlin, Abby Thorpe, Sarah Ido, all putting up great numbers for Alpenglow. And again, I think the question for Alpenglow is, what do they do again against Utah at home this upcoming weekend? We're going to talk about that. As well as what happens in the Wild Weekend when it's San Francisco and LA and Colorado all playing in Utah in that interconference matchup. If Alpenglow does well against San Francisco and LA, then that helps their record. And then it's just a matter of getting those head-to-head tiebreakers against Oregon and Utah, if we're assuming that Seattle might be a bit out of sight, especially given the goal differential they already have of 12 over Alpenglow.
Yeah, so I guess like we kind of talked about this a little bit before, and there was a comment on the Discord of like, are we surprised by Alpenglow's performance this weekend? I guess we kind of touched on it a little bit. Personally, I'm a little surprised.
12 is a big margin.
Yeah, like it's a lot. Looking at this team and like the experience that they have, whether it be club or like professionally, like I would have thought these games would be closer. It's possible that they just couldn't get used to the humidity, honestly, like the sea level. Like they're practicing at they're mile high city. So they're practicing at like a very high elevation, and discs fly differently at elevation than they do at sea level. very differently.
Sure. Yeah.
And, maybe it's possible that they just couldn't quite figure it out over these games. Possible. Whereas both of these teams are there.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess we can kind of equate it to as well, like when they were playing Utah, that game was a lot closer, but also Utah is at a very high elevation. So it could be just trying to get used to the elevation and how the disc flies at elevation or at sea level.
Well, I mean, there's going to be 2 major mini tournament feature weekends that Colorado's going to get to play as part of both Wild Weekend and then what they have a name now for the Colorado weekend. I don't remember. Rocky Mountain Rumble. That's fun. They'll have a couple opportunities to welcome teams who normally play at sea level up to elevation, even if they are playing in Utah for one of those weekends. So we'll see. I think your hypothesis could definitely pan out. I also do think, I'm of the opinion that I think we are going to, I'm expecting that Seattle, Oregon, and San Diego are going to continue to show that they are 3 of the best teams, if not the 3 best teams in the league. Because let's be real, Oregon, 3 games, 3 losses, but only a -5 point differential, that is now erased. They now have a positive goal differential after this win over Alpenglow, right? Seattle beats San Diego relatively comfortably in the opening game, falls short to Arizona, and then has since been a good Oregon team and stomped Colorado. Like, and San Diego, to their credit, right? Big wins, 7-point win and 11-point win over San Francisco and LA, respectively, last weekend, or a couple weekends ago now, and that's that we're recording this on Thursday evening. So I'm not surprised so much as this doesn't tell me as much about Colorado as it does Seattle and Oregon. And I'm going, again, very curious to see how Colorado fares in the cross-conference matchups come Wild Weekend in Week 7. I think that could be very telling against definitely more vulnerable San Francisco and LA squads.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think this is the end of Colorado, as you could say. Like, we knew that, like, we said that about Oregon too. Like, we don't think it was the end of Oregon. But when you get one win under your belt, your confidence skyrockets.
Definitely. Sascha, do you have a little sermon for us this time for the Western Ultimate League, or are you going to save it for the Premier Ultimate League for their week 1 action? What are you feeling this time around?
Today, I'm doing my sermon for the WUL. And my sermon today is why I think Tempest is just so good and so, like, dominant over all of these teams. Here is my take. Every single player on this roster lives in Seattle. And It's just so much easier to get everybody together for a practice when you live in the same city. Whereas all the other teams are pulling people from different states, from multiple hours away in the same state. Like, so it's a lot harder to try to get everybody together, and they can only do it like once every couple weeks or so. Like, they'll have their pod workouts with their different people that they live close to, but like a full team practice is a lot easier for Seattle than it is everybody else. And so because of that, I think they have a stronger chemistry. And that's why, like, that's personally why I think that Tempest is so good.
Yeah, I think it also helps, at least for this year, not necessarily thinking about their undefeated run last year, but they do bring like 2/3 or close to 2/3 of their 2022 roster into 2023. So regardless of where folks live, that helps to have already played a full season together. And obviously, right, Seattle has some very successful club teams previously and now. And so, lots of players with lots of big game experience, that cliche, but it bears a little bit of weight. and lots of time with different folks on the team, spent playing together in different settings. I also think, right, Seattle is one of those spots that has had the most experience, the longest time of folks playing pro, which I think has also helped. And obviously the rule sets have been slightly different here and there over the years. But I think that also helps Tempest. I think we're going to continue to see. I have a feeling the week 1 loss to Arizona is going to look all the more surprising by the time we get to the end of the season. I would not be shocked if that was Seattle's only loss this season. They're not infallible. We've seen it, right? Obviously, but still pretty good so far for Tempest. Anything else, Sascha, on the Western Ultimate League Week 4 action before we take a quick break before coming back to talking about the start of the PUL season?
Nope, I think we covered all of it.
All right, then we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we are talking PUL Week 1 action. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Our friends at VC Ultimate are proud to sponsor Double Overtime. VC proudly puts community over profit, focusing their support on initiatives that help promote inclusivity. As the first ever sponsor to back professional women's and non-binary Ultimate, VC puts its money where its mouth is when it comes to equitable action. VC also approaches product innovation intentionally to make more players feel like the Ultimate space is their own. Did you know that all VC core products are now 100% gender-free? If your team is in the market for uniforms or custom team gear, check out VCUltimate.com. Not only are they working to change the landscape of sport, VC's performance gear is the best on the field. Thanks to our sponsors of Double Overtime, VC Ultimate. Welcome back to Double Overtime presented by VC Ultimate. Sascha, the Premier Ultimate League season has officially started. How exciting.
Let's go.
2 games down and a bunch more to go.
Yeah, that's a bunch more to go. There's a lot.
A lot of games for the 12-team league. First 2, though, Portland rising at Austin Torch. Portland winning on the road, 14-13. And Raleigh Radiance at home, hosting Columbus Pride, winning 14-10. Where do you want to start? With the Portland-Austin game or with the Columbus-Raleigh game, Sascha?
Start with Portland-Austin. So Portland-Austin, what final score was, 14-13 the Portland win?
Yep.
Yeah. So for a little bit, Austin was leading this game. They looked to be in control for most of the first quarter and a little bit into the second quarter as well. And then Portland just kind of said, hey, quit that. And they decided to turn it on and ended up coming out with a win. But I guess that's not the whole story of the game. After 3 quarters, they were up by 3 scores. And Austin almost came back to force overtime. So that made the game pretty exciting, having the swings going both ways. But they just, couldn't do it at the end. The game was pretty windy.
Yeah, I feel like the weather across the eastern half of the US was kind of nasty all up and down the coast from what I was seeing and hearing, and I'm sure you were dealing with it at Easterns, not so much in the western half of the country, at least in my part of the world. So yeah, really windy at times in the Portland-Austin game. So, some things to consider, but Sophie Knowles looked great. Yuka Zhao, number of great goals, including a couple of big layout grabs. So it's sort of what we expect from Rising and really helpful, right? PUL, we were talking about the WL before the break, right? 8-game season in the WL, only 6-game season in the PUL, and in the very, very packed, dense, difficult East Division, getting a win on the road for Portland is a great step in the right direction versus your championship weekend pick, Austin. Not so great taking the early loss at home.
It's only one game, Jenna.
It's true.
It's only one game.
It's true. It's true. And it's out of the division, so and still, right? Like some of the folks that we would expect from Torch, Elise Bjork, 3 goals, a block. Julia Schmaltz, 3 goals, including Torch's last one in the last minute of the game to bring the game within 1. Annie Ortiz, 3 assists. Good all around for Torch, and nice fight at the end at home. And just unfortunate for them, they weren't able to pull out the win in the end. It's interesting. This is the second season now that these two teams have faced off in the early going, and both have been close games. And if I recall correctly, Portland also just barely won this game last year after Torch had a lead. So I don't know, if you're Austin, maybe you're not so open to the idea of hosting Portland come next to open the 2024 season, because it hasn't worked out super well the last couple of times.
But hey, maybe they want to say, hey, we're going to actually get this win this time.
Maybe. Austin folks, let us know what you think. Now, ex-interim commissioner Bonesaw, let us know what you think from your Austin roots. Is Torch going to host Rising a 3rd straight season and maybe take a loss to Portland 3 straight seasons? Let us know. Double OT Pod on Twitter. Double Overtime at ultraworld.com is their email address. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, real quick. I also think this is like great for Portland too, because they only took 15 players to this.
Oh yeah, I saw that before the game, and then Portland won, and I forgot about the fact that Portland had like almost half the number of players that Torch were running. Like, I think I was counting, if I counted correctly, it was 27 players for Austin versus 15 for Portland, which I think it gets very tiring when you don't have very many subs, but like there is some merit to, if one team is rotating through their roster, being able to put out the same group of folks over and over and over again. A few key players having good games can carry over the line that, might have helped Portland in this instance. Possibly. Hard to say.
It is hard to say. But I mean, I feel like that's good news for Portland, that if they can, go halfway across the country and win with 15 players, it bodes well for them coming up with to be able to have their full roster at closer games. But yeah, go ahead. Move on.
One last thing.
Yeah.
Pretty sure Portland and Philly play the only home and away matchup in the entire league. Right? It's definitely Philly. I'm pretty sure it's Portland because it's not New York and it's not DC. So it's got to be Portland. Which means that Portland has 4 in-division games. This was one of their only 2 out-of-division games, and they won it on the road. As you said, bodes well for them. But still, 4 divisional matchups going to be pretty key looking forward for especially the algorithm and figuring out who the best second place team is coming out for championship weekend. The other game, as mentioned, Raleigh-Columbus, Raleigh winning 14-10. Closer, I think, than people may have thought. And UNC, we'll talk about them. Pleiades taking on Philly Surge in the showcase game. So Radiant's missing a bunch of their top young talent, still get the win in very windy conditions again. I think bodes well. If you're Raleigh, you're probably very happy at the end of the weekend to have won without a bunch of your young college stars, and to also see Austin lose at the same time gives them an immediate advantage in that South Division race.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know how many, did we determine how many players Raleigh was missing due to Pleiades not being there?
I think it's I want to say it's 7 or 8.
Yeah, it was like a significant amount.
And arguably, a number of those players could be, if not are, Radiance's best players. I mean, Don Colton, Grace Connerly, Alex Barnett, all on the Radiance roster, all off playing with UNC this past weekend.
Yeah, very true. And like, I kind of had the same reaction as you when I first saw the score line. I was like, wow, like that was a lot closer than I thought it was going to be. I thought this was going to be, you know, similar to the Seattle Colorado score line. So bodes well for Raleigh that they can, you know, still have a comfortable win without some of their top players being there.
Yeah. And I mean, for Columbus, you know, tough to take moral victories in a 6-game season because there's only so many games out there. Columbus already 1 loss down, and that's already 16.66% of their season done. And still, right, some really outstanding statistical performances from Columbus. Kat McGuire, not super surprising that she's making a big impact already. 3 assists and 6 blocks. 6 blocks. Maggie Roll, 1 goal, 4 assists, 1 block. Mary Turner, 3 goals, 1 block. Rachel Mass, 2 goals, 1 block. Plenty of blocks. Windy conditions, not that surprising. But this was not a game, if you're Columbus, that you had circled on your calendar as a, you know, must win. This is a game that we have to get. They're going to be much more focused on those Midwest division matchups to try and knock off the presumed favorites at the start of the season, Minnesota Strike. Because it is, at the moment, again, on paper, only 2 games in. Seems like the probable best second place team will come out of the East Division. And so for Columbus, the focus has got to be on those Midwest Division matchups later in the season.
Right. And I mean, if they're doing like the algorithm thing of a 4-point loss is good for them.
That's true. Yeah, there's a chance that, right, if Columbus plays well enough and plays close in some of these out of division matchups, that yeah, they could potentially slot in as the best second place team, even with this loss to Raleigh, especially if Raleigh goes on to blow other teams out later in the season. To your point, the 4-point loss is going to look better and better and better. Again, it's always a little tough in windy conditions, and folks are traveling in the first week of the season or not traveling in the case of like half of Portland's roster. But some interesting results early on. It's, again, a little tough. We've only seen a third of the league play so far. And it's going to get a little bit better after this week, but as we've mentioned before, it's going to take till week 4 of the PUL season to get every team into action. So a little tough to draw some conclusive conclusions, as it were, at this point in time. Especially so, we got to talk about it. Philadelphia Surge, newcomers to the league, no games on record in the league so far, but they play the UNC Pleiades, the top of the college D1 women's division, in a showcase game on Sunday. And UNC wins. The college team beats the pros. Well, again, talked about plenty of college stars from UNC who are on the Radiance roster. It was in windy conditions. Philly was up 9-7 when Cap went on, game to 10. UNC managed to storm back, convert the long upwind break. Sascha, what are your thoughts on UNC upsetting Philly? Does this mean Philly is out of the PUL championship race? Should we automatically be like, oh, they lost to a college team, there's no chance they're going to make it a championship weekend in season 1? What are your thoughts?
No, I'm not worried about them at all, personally.
Fair.
Like, let's be honest here. Like, yeah, UNC is really freaking good. Like, they're incredible. I said on Twitter, why are we even having a national championship tournament at this point? Because we know what's going to happen. They're just blowing teams out of the water left and right. They're very good. But also, they are at the end of their season, and Philly is literally just starting.
Not even, technically.
Not even. Yeah. Like
their first game's this weekend.
Exactly. Like, so I'm not worried about it at all. Because the amount of chemistry each team has is significantly different.
Yeah. And it's something that our sister podcast, Deep Look, was talking about in their episode that released earlier today. We're recording a Thursday night. This is a little later than we do. Gives us the advantage, or at least me the advantage, as a very frequent Deep Look listener, to take some of Charlie and Keith's commentary and ideas. But like I think it's an active question of where would this UNC team slot in to the PUL rankings if we were to, well, you sort of have two options, right? You clone the players so that you say, okay, Raleigh Radiance gets to keep all of the UNC players, but then UNC also gets to keep all the UNC players, or you pull the UNC players out of the Radiance team. And I think it's right. The top teams, New York, DC, Raleigh. I think Raleigh with the players cloned, right? If Radiance get to keep the UNC players that are on the roster, I think Radiance slots above UNC. UNC Minnesota? UNC versus Pleiades versus Strike? I think that's an active question. Depends on if Mex and Robin are playing. Potentially. I think anyway, it's like
potentially
sort of a question of, I was starting to put together some power rankings that will come out Friday. Hopefully you'll hear this on Friday, and the power rankings update will come out on Friday. Someone was like, oh, you like think about Surge losing to UNC. I'm like, UNC might slot in above Surge anyway, so I'm not going to downgrade Philly when they might have lost to a team, to your point, that is at the end of the season. They are trying to be peaking now and for the next, into the next month, for a month and a half really, for UNC. Surge just getting started. I think it doesn't say as much about Philly as it does, and I think on Deep Look they were saying, look, give Surge another month and the result might go another way. You do it in not windy conditions, right? So that a team that has practiced a lot of zone together and a lot of, chemistry and that those sorts of conditions this season doesn't have as much of an advantage. Maybe it goes the other way. So, but it is fun because there's the hypothetical, right? Oh, does a college team have a chance against a pro team? The answer is, well, maybe in this case, maybe they do.
It's possible. I mean, like, I do think that this UNC team could do a lot of damage in the pro circuit. They're just that good. It's like the hypothetical of, like, if any of those championship winning Alabama football teams could, like, what would they do in the NFL? And I mean, we kind of see it with, like, the players that are in the NFL are just doing great things for their teams. So yeah, I think they would do well.
I think also, given the way that Ultimate, let's be real, it doesn't have the same type of infrastructure for the most part that, say, your NFL college football comparison has. Fundamentally, you get a lot more crossover between the best players in college and the best players in pro and the best best players in club. And yes, a bunch of those Alabama players go on and be very successful for their teams, but it's not quite in the same, like, sustained all of those players playing together on the same teams in the same way. And also talent level is a lot more concentrated in Ultimate. So it's a little unfair to compare a college team that has some of the best players from both pro team and the club team to, teams in areas that don't have that same concentration of talent. Sorry, Nashville or Columbus, for example. It's a little tough to make those direct comparisons when, again, the talent distribution isn't as even as it is in, say, the NFL or college football. So let us know your thoughts. Well, I'll just keep plugging that at OOTpod, double overtime at OLSworld.com. Yeah, so we'll see. We'll get to see Philly in action this weekend against New York. So that will be fun to see. One last bit of PUL news, conversation that feels relevant to talk about before we move on to our picks review and picks for the upcoming weekend. New PUL commissioner, Amanda Dallas, was on the PUL podcast with now ex-interim commissioner Bonesaw. And it was pretty funny because you should go listen to it, for one. Listen to our podcast and go listen to that podcast. Just, man, Dallas, new to the sport of Ultimate. At one point, Bonesaw tried to quiz her about different Ultimate acronyms, and I get it. It can be a little tricky. One thing that was new to me, UW, to stand for Ulti World. Sascha, is that one that you're very familiar with?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it depends on context.
Because I feel like for me, UW either means Madison or it means Seattle in terms of the two colleges.
Exactly. Depends on context.
I feel like UW for Ulti World is not as common parlance, but maybe I'm wrong. Bonesaw, let me know. I also thought it was interesting talking about Commissioner Dallas talking about some of the things that she's already seen that are working well for the PUL, including the live streams, which in Austin it was tough because they have a very great cool bowl environment, the grassy sort of sideline / bleachers hill thing. But boy, were those sidelines sometimes blocked by those bleachers. So, pros and cons, and it's also tough with each individual team setup being slightly different. But hey, it's nice to see that maybe our judge of live stream quality were a bit spoiled here in the Ultimate community.
That is pretty true. Yeah, I mean, live streaming can improve, and I think that it will improve as we're trying to figure out as it's not going to be as crazy windy, or trying to figure out rain situations with cameras and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, it's week 1. Live streaming will get better as they figure it out. I'm just excited to be able to talk to Dallas at some point. We're going to try to get her on the podcast, hopefully within the next couple weeks. I'm excited to chat and see what her knowledge is of Ultimate, and stuff like that, about, and maybe talk a little quad ball. I know nothing about quad ball, so that'd be pretty interesting.
I only know a little bit about quad ball, but can definitely use some more discussion and learning about it. And yeah, I don't think we'll be giving her quite the same terminology acronym quiz that Bonesaw did, but it'll be interesting to sort of just sit down because, as she mentioned in that PUL podcast episode, quite a few similarities in terms of thinking about how the two niche sports of quad ball and Ultimate have actually quite a few parallels, and even with their differences, there's lots of interesting things to think about in terms of how the two sports have been similar and have both had their issues and growing points that hopefully Commissioner Dallas can bring in to help the PUL continue to grow and thrive in the next months going forward in her first term in charge. Anything else, Sascha, before we do some picks review and picking?
Nope, let's do it.
Picks review. Sascha, I am sorry to say, I expanded my lead on you in the picks. I went 4-0 last week. Well, you went 2-2. My habit of generally trying to mostly pick chalk and being able to pick in opposition to, I think, some of your spicier picks paid off. I picked Oregon to win against Colorado versus you picked Alpenglow to get their first win there. And I picked Portland to win on the road. And Austin, although that one was a close one, just going in my favor. Currently sitting at an 11-5 record, and you were sitting at 7-9. But hey, still plenty of games to go, and schedule's only going to, for the most part, get busier for us. And we have 5 games to pick for this upcoming weekend. Western Ultimate League or Premier Ultimate League first, Sascha?
Let's do the Premier Ultimate League.
Okay, so we have Indy at DC and New York at Philly. Indy DC, that's actually a rematch of the 1-4 game at last year's championship weekend. I will pick that it will go the same way that it did then, with Shadow beating Red.
I agree. It's hard to bet against DC for most of these games.
Yeah, as we've mentioned, DC still has Claire Tripp and Clear Normile and etc. etc. And Indy has their standout players, but I think DC is just going to have too much. How about New York at Philly? This one is a bit of a showcase game. I think it's going to be featured as part of like an Amherst Invitational High School tournament. So that'll be cool. Notably for Gridlock, Noina Cartagena or Elizabeth Mosquera, they're both playing down at TEP this weekend. So New York down a couple of their great players, but still pretty loaded roster coming into the weekend. What's your pick?
I'm going to be picking New York, even without Yino or Mosquera, that they're just extremely strong team, and it's going to be Philly's first official game.
Okay. I might as well counter pick you. I'll pick Philly, bounce back after the loss to UNC. I think it's technically at Philly, even if it maybe isn't in Philly centrally. I think I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how the crowd shakes out between the two teams, since they're both close by. Let's go WL then. 3 games on the docket, all in conference games. Again, I will be at the LA San Francisco game. Let's start there. I think is it my turn to pick first? I think it is. I'm gonna pick my hometown Falcons because they beat LA on the road, so they might as well beat LA in San Francisco. And I would love to get to commentate a San Francisco win that actually matters, because I commentated the end of season game last year, which very much mattered and ended in a San Francisco win, but then ended up with San Francisco being out of the championship weekend anyway. Sascha, what is your pick?
I'm also picking San Francisco. They've looked way better than I thought they would, personally. And I think they're just going to keep rolling with
Interesting. San Francisco and LA both registering close wins over Arizona at the Super Bloom Beach Bowl. So we'll see who comes off the better from that weekend. How about let's go Utah at Colorado. Sascha, you gonna pick?
Picking my Utes, my wild babies.
Alpenglow to start the season 0-4. Oh my gosh.
Yep.
I'm gonna pick Alpenglow to win at home. I was looking earlier as I was trying to think about my picks for this upcoming week. I was like, oh, the home teams have won for the most part, and then I was like, I don't know if that's really true. It's been true some weeks and not been true other weeks. I'm gonna say that it's gonna more hold true this weekend. Final game, San Diego at Arizona. Arizona at home? Oh, it's tempting. It's tempting. I'll do it.
You won't do it. You're doing it. You're doing Arizona at home.
Look, did it last year. They've done it so far this year. I think it's possible. I mean,
I'm picking San Diego.
That's the chalk bet, and that's paid off for me. So, maybe it'll pay off for you this time around.
It's gonna pay off for me.
I mean, I did just pick all the 3 home teams in the WL. So, actually, did I just pick home teams across the board? I did.
Yep.
Well,
all
you
the home
know,
teams.
let's hope for some home cooking in a weekend that I am commentating. Let us know your thoughts. Let us know your picks if you would like. WOTA pod on Twitter, etc., etc. Only one last thing to talk about, Sascha, before we sign off, and it is highlight of the week.
Highlight of the week.
Dip, dip. Sascha, what is our highlight of the week?
Honestly, it's not just, you know what? Yes, it's one specific highlight, but it's like one player, really. And that's Sadie Jaziski with her 8-assist game. Just mind-blowing bonkers. The one throw that stuck out in my mind, though, is she had this like 55 to 60 yard huck against Colorado that was just, there was a layout D, then she went, picked it up, and just yeeted that thing, and it was perfect.
Slim chance that catcher's gonna come in, and the shot goes up. It's big. Ricarte running it down. Hey,
really impressive. Perfect touch on it, leading the receiver. And just like, people are like, oh yeah, like, get into power position that generates more power so you can throw further. And Jaziski's like, yeah, no, I don't need that. I'll just throw this like over half this football field from a standstill, no big. So anyway, there are 7 other assists that you can peruse and choose from Jaziski in this game. So that's one we recommend, but you can take your pick. Seattle off this upcoming weekend, but plenty of action. 3 games in the WL, 2 games in the PUL. Check out all the action this weekend. But that'll do it for this episode of Double Overtime presented by VC Ultimate. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week, reviewing all of the action as we somehow already approach the halfway point of the Western Ultimate League season. We will talk to you then. Bye.